The June 26, 2018 meeting of the City of Lawrence Redevelopment Commission is called to order. Quorum is present. Commissioners Blount, Clifford, Hicks, Kimmerly, and Commissioner Sullivan is joining us via teleconference, and Mr. Dick Friege is here as well. The first item on the agenda is the approval of minutes from the June 5th, 2018 special meeting. The commissioners have reviewed the minutes. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, may I have a motion for approval?
Approve.
So moved by Commissioner Blount, and a second, please, by Commissioner Hicks. All those in favor by show of hands, unanimous. Okay. Next on the agenda is the approval of claims and purchase orders for payment. Today we have two vouchers. Today we have one voucher actually for the approval of $32,902.87. Mr. Starnes, please comment on the transactions resulting from these vouchers.
Yes, I think you'll see the usual suspects, Bruce Carter and Associates, BCA, that's our EPA grant administration and technical consultants, and Hanson Engineering for professional services related to Franklin Road, preliminary engineering and design. The one different thing that you might see on there is the Indianapolis Star, which is advertising expenses for running our public notices related to the RFP for the Trades District. I think that sums it up.
Questions from the commissioners? Hearing none, may I have a motion for the approval of the claims? So moved by Commissioner Kimmerly. And a second, please, by Commissioner Hicks. Thank you. May I, by show of hands, approve the payment of the claims? All in favor? That's unanimous. And next on the agenda is the staff report from Mr. Starnes.
Thank you. I just wanted to run through some things, mostly update-wise. We're kind of in a holding pattern, waiting for the next phase. Beginning with Meyer Plastics, the next phase of RDC activity on the Meyer Plastics project will come after the council has passed a resolution authorizing the RDC to create the new allocation area for Meyer Plastics. And so I wanted to update you on the process because there are some other approvals beyond what the RDC has already done that will have to take place before it comes back to the RDC for public hearing and confirmatory resolution. The Economic Development Commission, which only meets as needed to approve bond issuance for economic development revenue bonds, met on June 20th and unanimously passed its resolution and findings of fact related to the Meyer Plastics deal following a presentation by our bond counsel and financial advisor. It went very smoothly, went well. The Corporation Counsel, David Johnson, and I have an ongoing exchange with the council, the Common Council President, Lisa Chavis, and the council attorney, Christina Wheeler, about council approvals and scheduling and timeline that's been productive. We've sort of done a preemptive FAQ document that David and I both worked on about some questions we could anticipate from the council related to the deal that has been circulated to councilors. The council's attorney has reviewed the relevant documents, the RDC resolution, the EDC resolution, the proposed bond ordinance, the council resolution, and approve them as to form. I think we have her support, so it's a matter of working through the process and meeting the council's expectations. We hope that will go smoothly, and the initial reading of the bond ordinance and the resolution related to Meyer Plastics are on the agenda for next Monday's council meeting, July 2nd. We'll also have Brian Bosma there to present. He's put together a PowerPoint presentation about the deal that was well received by the EDC, and I think we had some councilors watch the presentation that was filmed and broadcast through the city's website and reacted favorably we understand. So we look forward to that presentation and hearing any questions, and we'll see how the council would like to proceed on following that as to approvals and timeline. The council generally at the mid-month meeting only approves claims and vouchers, so we're anticipating that it could be first reading of resolution and ordinance on July 2nd, and then final approval then at the first meeting in August, unless the council is willing to deviate from its normal schedule and render final approvals on the July 18th meeting. So we're pushing for that to happen just to keep this deal moving and put our best foot forward as a city. I think it's important to recognize that Meyer Plastics, the company, I think, as we've discussed, we think would be positive, but I'd like to keep in mind that they're represented by CBRE, one of the largest commercial industrial brokerages in central Indiana, and McGuire Sponsel, an economic development consultant that has clients looking for new expansion or relocation opportunities across the Midwest. And of course, legal counsel at Barnes & Thornburg, that's a large law firm that has lots of clients, that does lots of real estate and public finance work. And I think it's an opportunity to maybe turn around what we've heard from plenty of brokers and economic development consultants that Lawrence doesn't always tend to be on the radar, so to speak, because there's an impression that it's hard to do business here, and it's hard to locate here, and it's kind of endemic to companies wanting to invest in Lawrence. And I think the more that we can put our collective best foot forward and show this team and Meyer Plastics that that's not the case, and that we can come up with a deal that works for attracting a positive company like that and get it through the approval process with predictability and efficiency, could only be good news for the next CBRE or McGuire Sponsel client that might be looking for an opportunity. So I appreciate the speed at which the RDC has worked on this, and we hope that carries over to all the other various processes. But that's kind of the status now. Is it's in the hands of the council to render their approvals before it comes back to you all. So any questions about that process, timeline? Again, July 2nd, council meeting, the resolution and first reading of the bond ordinance are on the agenda. Should any of you feel obliged to attend, I think Ralph Meyer of Meyer Plastics will be here, as well as some of his team, including his bond attorney and economic development consultant and broker, in case there are questions. And again, I think we anticipate that our bond counsel will make a presentation. So just to show support, or if you're curious, feel free to attend that meeting. I'm not going to tell you have to or should, but if you're otherwise inclined, it could be a good showing. So
will Brian be at that meeting, Boston?
And Jim Higgins, both.
And Jim Higgins. And will you be there?
I will.
Wow, what a team. Okay, that's great. At worst case, it will be back to us, obviously, anticipated.
Yes.
It would be back to us in August.
In August, right.
Okay.
And depending on how the timeline goes, it's a little early to really say this yet, but if we wanted to keep up or push things along, there's a prospect of, I think we could do a special meeting in August and approve it prior to the regularly scheduled meeting. If the council were to give its final approvals on August 6th, then I think there's a public notice period, and the soonest after that the RDC could meet to do a public hearing and confirmatory resolution would then be middle of the month, but that would come a week or so ahead of its regularly scheduled meeting. So if there were some advantages to that, because, I take that back, because after the council approval, there will be a 30-day remonstrance period under statute anyway. So as long as we meet in scratch what I just said. But okay. Yes, that would mean bond closing. If the council were to approve on August 6th, I think bond closing then would be September 6th or 7th.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry for that aside.
That's no problem. Thank you. Questions? Other questions from the commissioners? None?
Great.
Thank you.
And then on the Trades District project, of course, we put out an RFP, published it. That's what the Indy Star claim was for. It was duly published in the Indy Star. We didn't receive a response, which then, 30 days after that period, we can negotiate unilaterally with anyone who might be interested about what a disposition would look like, an economic development project or deal would look like. So we're in that period now. In the interim, I have, we know there's some interest there from a company that would be consistent with the Trades District. I've put them together with the IEDC, given that there would potentially be a new component coming over from Ohio to join the Indiana operations here at the Trades District site, which would trigger some state-level tax incentives. And also through that discussion, I'm not sure to what extent we've talked about opportunity zones, but there were 2 census tracts in Lawrence that were designated by the governor to be opportunity zones, including the census tract in which the Lawrence Trades District area is located, which really, it's early going. That's a new tool. The IRS hasn't made rules on it. CDFI hasn't made rules on it. So how it gets rolled out, it's kind of yet to be seen. But realizing that we have a prospect of some significant investment there in the Trades District that is in an opportunity zone, I think the IEDC and the state is pretty excited about the prospect that those two things could converge and would look to make Lawrence kind of a model roadmap for investments in opportunity zones, and would also boost the publicity and the profile of that project, which is always a positive thing. So I'm hoping, if nothing else, we get some good support from the state in getting the word out about the Trades District and about new investment there, and about Lawrence in general. So that's looking positive. And again, once that 30-day clock expires, we'll be able to talk about disposing of that property and sale and price and incentives and how that might go. And that will be, just after the Independence Day holiday. So we'll stay on that. Any questions about that process?
What's an opportunity zone? Can you explain exactly what the state means when they say that?
Yeah, to some degree, the opportunity zone concept comes from the latest federal tax bill, and it creates a mechanism whereby state governors can designate certain qualified census tracts, which are usually low, moderate income census tracts, as opportunity zones, which then triggers aspects of the tax code whereby somebody, say a high net worth individual that has some capital gains to be realized from other investments, could take those capital gains and invest them in a project, acquisition of property or construction of a building in an opportunity zone, and get some tax benefit from that investment based on the size of it and the length of the holding, and any both on then the capital gain that was invested, and then some benefits on any additional capital gains realized from that investment itself. So potentially advantageous tax structure to encourage investment in low, moderate census tracts. It's kind of a reverse new markets tax credit, as opposed to buying the credit. You're actually directly incentivizing direct investment into some of these census tracts and neighborhoods. And the fort and the census tract around it was designated by the governor, as was again a census tract, which it's hard to mentally map what census tracts do, but the one that includes entirely the Trades District as planned around 465 and Pendleton Pike was designated as well. So how that comes to bear, I think it's new, and everybody's kind of figuring it out as they go, but to the extent that somebody with some capital gains tax liability or exposure wanted to invest in a project in the Trades District or on the fort, either one, it could be a beneficial from a tax standpoint to do so. That could only help.
Go ahead.
No.
Is that good? Thank you. That was good. That's a decent explanation. It's individual and or entity? So it's not, yeah, so it can be.
I believe so. So I said, a high net worth individual just as an example. I think it could be a corporation. Certainly, we've seen the new markets tax credit landscape is dominated by banks. They might come to play in opportunity zones as well, but I think the idea is to lend a kind of a companion to the lending that occurs around the new markets tax credit side, because it would require an equity investment as opposed to a loan. So even if it's a bank, the investment looks a little different.
And it's just, right now, it's impossible to put an economic value on it.
It really is. It's pretty early. I would imagine they get aggregated into funds, qualified opportunity funds, similar to new market tax credits funds.
But it's an opportunity that we didn't have before.
Yeah.
Well, it's,
Yeah. So good news, we think and expect, but it's so early that we don't know exactly how. And then on the Shadeland Avenue property, the former sheriff's garage, Bob Powers Toyota. I don't know if we've talked about this, but through the phase 1 that we did under the EPA grant, realized that was an old Toyota dealership.
never knew that.
Never knew that either. So Bob Powers Toyota, that's what that used to be. We now have an executed project agreement with Service Master by Crossroads, the bidder selected by the Redevelopment Commission, that starts the due diligence period and gives the company access to do some evaluation. They need to do some extensive renovation and roof. I think it requires that they spend a minimum of $250,000 on the renovation. I think they're projected to spend a little bit more than that, and bring it sort of incorporates the proposal that was reviewed and selected by the Redevelopment Commission. They have 45 employees currently across 2 sites that will be consolidated here in Lawrence, so it sort of keeps tabs on those commitments, and the use as proposed will require a zoning variance. Kind of a downhill one. It had been approved. There's a current variance that allows for motorcycle repair. I think there had been a tenant in that building that sort of worked on motorcycles. So this really is just to transform that variance to allow for some indoor storage and office use. So the Service Master has applied for that zoning variance to the Lawrence BZA sort of as the RDC's agent, or with our approval, given that it doesn't own the land yet. So we'll see that, I think, on the Lawrence BZA agenda in July. And if that should go forward, then we'll schedule a closing on the real estate. Again, that's $205,000 sale proceeds to the RDC, and new investment on that side of town, which I think will be very positive. So just an update on that. We do have a project agreement that's been executed. After the zoning, we'll be closing. Any questions about Shadeland?
No, it's good.
And one last thing that didn't make the report. It's from a meeting I had just today. We started a working group with Chris Barnett, who's here with the Lawrence CDC, Aletha Dunstan, who's now the Fort Harrison Reuse Authority director, and Tracy Yates, the chamber director, about potentially targeting later this year to apply for a grant to do a sort of comprehensive economic development plan for the city. It occurred to all of us that while there is a Pendleton Pike redevelopment plan and there's a Fort Harrison sort of redevelopment plan and then the Lawrence Village plan as an adjunct to that, there's never been any real stakeholder engagement or planning around how the fort connects to Lawrence as a whole and how we might better market the area as a whole, and what its sort of strengths and opportunities are, and how we can better collaborate across the various pieces of that coalition, the CDC and the chamber and the Reuse Authority. Okra has a planning grant product that's very geared toward exactly that type of thing, and that can be added to. It would generate a basic economic development plan with recommendations and things, but if we wanted to enhance it by adding some focus on marketing and branding and sort of how do we tell the story of Lawrence and explain it that could be sort of added in. So I think that would be a positive coalition and a good direction, especially given that there's just kind of a lack of underlying stakeholder engagement around a centralized plan approach. So I think that's been a productive conversation. I think the timing is good to bring those organizations together and get some funding from the state and work toward a good plan for Lawrence to kind of speak to the entire area. And we've got some good tech growth here on the fort. We've got a trades district plan down on Pendleton Pike. How do those talk to each other? How do we boost the whole of Lawrence on a couple of different areas? Maybe adding a piece to look at housing stock and opportunity of an overall survey of what the current housing market looks like in Lawrence, as well as industrial and commercial markets. So I think that'll be good. So just to tag that on there, it's kind of evolving into maybe a joint application kind of process later this year.
Cam, one question. So you're going to be applying to the state. To be more specific, is it through the IDEC?
No, actually through the Office of Community and Rural Affairs, OCRA.
Community and
Rural Affairs.
Okay, office. Okay.
OCRA is the main, if not the only, agency or department at the state level that administers community development block grant dollars from HUD. And given that Lawrence is not yet an entitlement community, once a city reaches a population of 50,000 or more, they get an allocation of community development block grant dollars. Lawrence is very close. And we'll see in the 2020 census if it sort of crosses that threshold. But in the meantime, then CDBG money statewide is allocated by OCRA through various grant programs, including this planning grant, which we'd have to apply for. But that's one of the Aletha Dunstan worked at OCRA for several years and ran their CDBG program. So she's a good resource in this regard, and this planning grant's technically competitive, but it's so long as the procedure is followed, is very often awarded and not hyper competitive. So it's usually a $40,000 grant with a 10% local match,
Okay.
which is
She would be a valuable resource. So she would actually, are you saying that she would actually write the grant? Write the application?
probably not.
Okay.
No,
You'd
we'd probably contract with somebody to do that.
Okay.
And often those are grant writing services for grants like that are in kind contributions, and then by companies that hope to then administer the grant down the road.
So this process is something we're going to have to fund? Is that what you're?
So potentially on a couple levels, if we wanted to hire and pay rates for a grant writer services, then that might be a cost that, and I'm not saying that would necessarily be funded by the RDC, but could. But the other thing we've talked about is, the $40,000 grant would create an economic development plan. If we wanted to add things to it, like a kind of a marketing plan effort or a housing study, those would be potentially added to the contract and funded differently. Maybe the Reuse Authority contributes, maybe the RDC contributes part of that, maybe even the Chamber contributes. They have a strong interest in how to best market the city of Lawrence and the opportunities that are here and the businesses that are here. So there may be a sort of a compilation of funding to make that ultimate planning contract
Sure.
More than $40,000. Maybe it's 60 or 60.
I think it's worth taking a look at for sure. Yeah. What's your time frame on this? What are you looking at?
The OCRA doesn't get OCRA gets a reallocation of its federal money, so it grants federal dollars to communities in July. So I think we'll probably look to get an application in yet this year, but it'll probably be this fall.
Very good.
And then then you procure a team to run the grant or to run the plan and create the plan. Usually results in a nice looking plan document. I think even that is a good kind of marketing piece that highlights some opportunities and makes recommendations. So that would probably get underway end of the year, beginning of next year.
that same note, connecting Lawrence with the fort, whatever happened with our Zagster's bike program that we had approved a year or two ago?
Yes, good question. We've talked about rehabilitating that effort. We do have a service contract with Zagster that then we were taking to raise some money. Got a couple of commitments and needed a couple more, and then kind of paused because we hit winter and the chamber director turned over. Now that Trace is there and gotten his feet under him, we've talked, and then not long after that, the Reuse Authority director turned over as well. So that both of those kind of created some delay, but I've talked to them both recently about renewing the effort to raise some funds to install some stations. We still think it'd be positive. We've got Bloomerang was excited to fund a station, and got a couple of no's that from IU Health and from Ackerman Group and from David Weekly that we might revisit and then look to broaden the push a little bit and use their help. The Trace is willing to pitch in and help ask companies. So it kind of got paused, but the idea is still that we would hope to bring it to life, but it will require some additional contributions, sponsorship contributions from companies around the city.
So did we ever get any stations in?
No.
We have commitments for 2, and the
physical, it was never implemented.
they weren't installed. So we have existing commitments for sponsorships for 2 stations. The launch really, we were targeting 4 to 5 to launch, and then sort of got 2 and had some no's and paused it. So now we hope to get a couple more, and then we'll look to roll it out. So the pieces are kind of in place other than the sponsorships, and having some more hands on deck and carrying the water on that and getting those sponsorships will be greatly helpful.
Interestingly enough, we have other options to consider now. If you've spent any time downtown recently, 5-power scooters.
Yeah.
They're the rage.
No.
Bikes aren't the rage anymore.
Right.
They're fun. I've used. I'll say that.
Well, no, especially I didn't realize that when you see somebody approaching you on a sidewalk at 15 miles an hour on a scooter, it causes you pause.
They do move, yeah, and that doesn't require a city contract or sponsorships. They just kind of drop them, and then there's a service
Exactly, or anything.
fee. So that may be an opportunity.
It is kind of interesting.
But I will say, you know what, I meant to mention this. Part of what touched off this discussion is an effort by the Chamber and the Reuse Authority and myself to identify and kind of get our arms around growing tech investment centered on the fort. They had kind of a meetup, invited several companies that they identified that seemed to have a relation to tech and that were on the Tech Point Foundation. That's part of CICP. Has a list of tech-oriented companies. So we sort of cross-referenced that with Lawrence and identified some and invited them to an informal gathering a couple weeks ago just to talk about their thoughts about Lawrence and the Fort as a tech campus, and could that grow, and what are the elements of helping that grow, and even just bringing that cluster of business owners together which was hugely positive. And the story is interesting. I think we've identified 24 to 25 sort of tech-related businesses that are headquartered here in sort of a square mile, which gives us a pretty healthy tech investment company location density here, and seems to indicate that has some traction. And given the high growth potential of a lot of that sector in general, and the ability for the growth thereof to attract positive new residents and talent to the area, as well as continued additional investment, is something we'd like to harness. So looking at ways to do that in conjunction with kind of first identifying that as a community here, and having some ongoing dialogue with those companies and their owners and officials, and about what they'd like to see and how we could best help them grow. And I think that's been a positive effort so far. So, and things like amenities, bike share, scooters, that's all part of that attraction effort. So, Good point. That's partly on me that we've paused it. That there have been some reasons for that, but we need to renew the effort. Yeah.
Other questions from the commissioners? Hearing none, that would conclude the staff report. Next, under new business, would be a vote to change the July RDC meeting date from July 31st, or to July 31st, 2018. We discussed this briefly at the last meeting. All the commissioners at that point concurred that that was a good meeting date. So we've now learned that we have the room available on that date, so we can actually vote to change it. So with that, I would entertain a motion to change the meeting to July 31st, the July meeting to July 31st. And so moved by Ms. Kimberly, and a second from David Blunt, and then all those in favor by show of hands. And Frank, did you hear that?
Yes, sir, I did.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, I did.
Okay. Next, kind of on the heels of what Cam has said about Althea Dunstan, Althea who is the executive director of the Fort Harrison Reuse Authority, has requested time to introduce herself to this commission and to provide a brief overview, 10 minutes, of FHRA projects, significant FHRA projects, at our next meeting on July 31st. She further asked for an early position on the agenda, as she has another commitment following that evening. I think her timing is good. I propose, especially based on what Cam has just said, I propose that we welcome Mrs. Dunstan to attend the meeting and to provide her 10 minutes preceding the staff report, which would kind of lead right into you. Would the commissioners be, where I'm seeing heads nod? Yes, so I'll go ahead and extend that invitation. If we could include her on the next agenda, that would be great.
And if it comes to you and it's not, and I've forgotten, to just remind me, we'll make sure it's on there.
Okay, and I'll confirm back to her that she's in for the 31st. Any other business to come before the commission this evening? Chris has his head down. John, okay, thanks for being here, folks. If there is no other business, I would.
Cam, is there an update on the Lilly grant? Art?
Good question. I had a meeting about that just yesterday, about the sort of the next phase of the application process, which is due in August. So that's where we are still, is we've been selected to move forward to the full application, and we're putting that together. I think our feedback from, I think prior to our last meeting, we had a meeting with Lilly endowment officials about feedback from our initial, I think they call it a thought paper, or sort of pre-application that they had screened initially. And the feedback told us to take a hard look at sustainability and operations. I mean, it would create a long-term, there's certainly some near-term aspects of the project that would create a public green space and make some improvements to the Starrett Center and the theater and Otis Avenue. But long-term, it would be something that would need to be programmed and operated, and I think Lily wanted to see some more detail about how we would go about doing that and making sure it's a sustainable project. So we're talking with Indiana Landmarks and some other potential philanthropic sources, the Ephraimson family and some others that might have interest in contributing to the funding to make it an ongoing positive project and amenity for the area, for all of Lawrence. So that's where we are, is working through that to then build up to the full application that's due, I think, at the end of August. But the coalition has still been strong and positive, and good turnout at the meeting yesterday, and we'll continue to have meetings to refine budgets and plans and all that. So good question. Thanks.
Anything else? No? If not, then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And second? And thank you, David. All those in favor by show of hands. We're adjourned.